Thank you, Kevin. So we finally come to the time of our service that we all been waiting for, because I'm sure people did not get up this morning coming to church wanting to hear me talk. So I got to tell you, a part of my nervousness is that I've been excited. Meeting our guest preacher, the distinguished Reverend Dr. Derrick Harkins, is to me paramount to meeting one of my basketball celebrities, you know? It's like, you know, this is somebody who is well known in the Christian community for the amazing work that he has done. I'm going to read you a little bit of his bio before I turn over the mic. But I just wanted to say that I am so glad and happy to finally get to meet you. And the other thing I did not know, which, you know, needs to be added to your bio, is that you sing incredibly well. I'm standing next to him, and I'm like, oh, my goodness. Okay, so the Reverend Dr. Derrick Harkins, serves as a board member of the American Baptist Churches of Metropolitan New York, where he also chairs the Public Missions Committee. Dr. Harkins recently completed his tenure as an appointee to the Biden-Harris administration as director of the Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, which is also known as HUD. From 2015 to 2020, Dr. Harkins was Senior Vice President for Innovations in Public Programs at Union Theological Seminary in New York City. He has served as chair of the board of Odyssey Impact Productions and is an executive producer of several acclaimed documentaries, including most recently A Crime on the Bayou. Dr. Harkins served for 17 years as pastor of the 19th Street Baptist Church in Washington, D.C., formerly a vice president with the North American Baptist Fellowship and of the Baptist World Alliance. He has appeared in media outlets including CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and NPR, and has written op-eds appearing in the Dallas Morning News, the Washington Post, and the Sojourner's blog, God's Politics. His ministerial career began at the historic Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, New York, as assistant minister. He has earned undergraduate and graduate degrees from Boston University, Union Theological Seminary, and United Seminary in Dayton, Ohio. A native of Cleveland, Ohio, he and his wife, Julianne Harkins, are the parents of 2 adult daughters. And I gotta tell you, this bio is really an abridged version of all the accomplishments that this man has done for, you know, and stuff. So if you want to know more, check him out online. Okay. And can we give a warm welcome, please, to Reverend Harkins.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, good morning. I tell you, I am so humbled by being able to be with you all. Your reputation precedes you as a church family, and I'm excited because it's very seldom that I receive a text from the pastor of a congregation where I'm about to speak in their absence while they are motorcycling in South Dakota. So that happened just a few days ago, and I said, well, look at this. But I'm so glad to know of the work that you all do as a church family, certainly your pastor, Reverend Sparks, and of course, thank you, Cheryl, for your hospitality. And it's been great to just even meet so many of you as we've gathered here this morning. I want to just begin by letting you know that it's interesting when you Google a date, Oftentimes, many different things come up, of course, as we've said, appropriately in a celebratory fashion, that this, of course, is the second Sunday in Pride Month, and we're thankful for that. It is, as I was able to note coming down on the subway today, very clearly that it is Puerto Rican Pride Day as well, and we're thankful for that. And also, if you happen to Google the second Sunday in June, you will find that in some quarters it is celebrated as National Children's Day. And I think it's an appropriate thing to be able to take all of those other points of celebration, pull them together, and understand how, in the context of acknowledging and celebrating children, we're called to much higher and greater work. So again, on this day, it's a joy and a blessing to be with you all. Would you join with me in prayer? Loving God, we'd ask now that your word, your hand, and your presence be in our midst, and all that would be done and said would be to your honor. We ask these things knowing and believing that you are love personified, you are mercy and grace present, and you are all that we can seek to be by your hand. These things we ask. Amen. The passage that was read this morning from the 19th chapter of Matthew is one of those that I like to call a 4 o'clock in the morning wake-up passage. Because, Bible scholar or not, if somebody said to you, and then Jesus said, and in the King James Version, suffer the little children, let them come unto me, I think just about all of us would be able to say, and the rest of that is, and do not hinder them. I love it in the NRSV. It's a little bit more to our contemporary hearing when it says that let the little children come to me and do not stop them, for it is to such as these that the kingdom of heaven belongs. Now, again, like I said, that is such a cognitively understood and recognizable and familiar passage. I was actually looking around as I was entering into the sanctuary just to make sure, because as the case is in so many sanctuaries, one of the stained glass windows oftentimes has a depiction of Jesus with little children gathered around him, living out this passage that we're hearing this morning, because it is so elemental to, I think, what our understanding of the ministry and the life of Jesus is. But let's look at it a little bit more closely. And you can't get away from the fact that even though it ends up with the wonderful and warm, welcoming invitation that Jesus extends to children and subsequently to all of us, it begins in a little bit of a different place. It says the disciples' actions, speaking sternly to those who brought these children, shooing them away. Why? Maybe because these children were, quote, a handful, unquote. Children in full childhood mode, full of exuberance and energy and life and joy. And in the face of that, Jesus says, don't stop them from coming to me, which of course is what we would hope and trust and pray that Jesus would say. But he goes on from there. Because it would be enough if Jesus simply said, let the children gather around me because they deserve to be loved. But he says, don't stop them. Let them come to me because heaven looks like them. So by Jesus' own definition, heaven may very well be a place of unrestrained joy, the exuberant noise of life, and the wonder that is possessed in childhood. Now, let's be real. If any of you have ever been on a New York City bus around 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a weekday, you have experienced the exuberance of childhood. You have seen it firsthand. Now, yes, it can be a lot to take in. But the reality is that if we understand what Jesus is saying to us, he's saying that that exuberance, that joy, that fullness of life is what really is the typification of what we understand heaven to be. Now, the fact that Jesus welcomes the children should bring relief to some. If I'm going to spend any time trying to comprehend the concept of heaven, Jesus' brief description here is more encouraging than a place of rigid imperial perfection. You know, sometimes I think we make compounded rules because it's easier for us not to have any imagination. I think about what heaven might be typified as in the minds of some. Now, some of you may be old enough to remember when the absolute epitome of interior decor was to make sure that your most beautiful and expensive sofa and love seat, or whatever it might be, was covered in at least a millimeter or so of thick, and God forbid there ever be any humidity in the room, plastic. And you might say, well, what's the rationale? The rationale was, well, we're going to cover the sofa or the love seat in this ugly plastic so we can appreciate its beauty. Now, there's something wrong with that sequence of thought. So, in other words, the rigidity that sometimes we think is what represents the ultimate nature of God is the very opposite of what's being celebrated here. When Jesus tells us that children are a reflection of heaven, not only should we have an appreciation for children in their own right, but we ought to also understand the larger image, the larger story that Jesus is trying to share with us. There's so many ways to think about this, but on this morning, let me just leave you with these. First of all, children. If we say we love children, if we say that we have affinity and affection for them, we have to live that out in real and viable and tangible ways. Now, of course, it's easy to love those children that are in close proximity to you by family or by other connection. But the task that we're called to here is to love children, but even love more broadly in a fuller sense. So I would say to you that in order for our love to be meaningful and effective and have magnitude, it has to be a love that, yes, has sentiment to it, but it also has to be a love that has justice attached to it. Because you see, justice allows us to love beyond our personal reach. It's not humanly possible for me to have enough sentiment and affection and affinity for all the children that there are. I just heard us just a few moments ago talking about addressing the reality, the crisis of those migrants who have come into New York and how we as the people of God can extend our arms to them. And one of the ways that we do that is by making sure that we exercise justice that has often been denied in other quarters, but justice that comes forth from us because that's the very nature of what God gives to us. So understanding that our love for children, the children who are the reflection of heaven, needs to start in a place that includes justice, because justice allows us to love beyond our personal reach. But along with that, understand that we're called, and again, not just children, but we're called to provide a place, a sense of protection, yes, of love and security that's epitomized in what Jesus just says to these children who are gathered around him, but should be lived out by all of us. In other words, if we are the community of the faithful, if we are the people of God, then it is by the very nature of who we claim to be that we extend love and protection to all who are gathered in this place and beyond. There should never be a time when anyone even remotely thinks about entering into a community of our faith to think that they would be marginalized, objectified, and pushed into the shadows. So when Jesus says, suffer the little children and let them come to me, he's giving us the larger message that his arms and subsequently our arms need to be wide open to any and all who seek to be in our presence. A sense of just love, a sense of safety and protection. But here's something else. You can love children all you want, but if you are not about the task of nurture, then you are doing them a great disservice. In other words, you can't love a child in a static context. You've got to nurture. You've got to understand that growth is a part of the definition of childhood. In fact, obviously in the medical world, the idea of failure to thrive is a crisis. So we need to understand that if we are called, as Jesus calls us, to understand these children that he's beckoning and welcoming, but as he's calling it to all of us more broadly and in the same measure, we're called to be different down the line than from where we are in the present moment. What do I mean by that? There ought to be a deepening of our understanding of love, a deepening of our understanding of justice, a deepening of our compassion, a deepening of how it is that we seek to serve others. We don't come here on Sunday mornings just for the self-satisfaction of being here. We come here to be enlivened in the witness of our faith in the world. We come here to be nurtured, to grow, to be a little bit different next week than we were last week. By how we love, by how we serve, by how we bear our light. So in the same way that children need to show evidence of growth, we need to show that measure of evidence of growth as well. But also, when Jesus says that heaven looks like these children, I think Jesus is letting us know something else that we ought to make sure we don't forget. It's easy in the work of doing what is just and right and equitable by society's standards, it's easy to become transactional real quickly. We can be doing the right thing, but it can be task-oriented. We can be about justice, but it can be task and transactionally inclined. I think Jesus is saying to us when he says that heaven looks like these children is that we ought to never lose our sense of joy. Whatever it is that we do, we ought to do it because we are motivated, we are uplifted by the fact that we are in relationship and communionship with the eternal God, and that ought to give us a measure of joy. Now, you've heard it said probably many other times that joy is not dependent upon the immediate circumstance. Joy, indeed, has a durability beyond the immediate present moment. I don't know about you, but I happened on Wednesday, I had to go down to Washington for some business and then take the train back up. So I got a front row seat, as it were, of what transpired by greatest magnitude here in New York, but was moving its way down the coast. And so by the time I left Washington late on Wednesday afternoon, the skies were already getting an unhealthy tinge to them. And by the time we got back here to New York, it was already dark, but even still in the dark, we could see what it was that was enveloping the entirety of the East Coast. Now, I say that to say this. Now, when we find ourselves in circumstances that are bigger than us, when we find ourselves in things that are calamitous beyond our comprehension, it's easy then to throw up our hands and to say all is lost, but I don't come from that kind of spiritual stock. Because you see, I come from a lineage of those individuals who understood how to trust in a God who was above and beyond the immediacy of that circumstance. I come from stock, if you will, spiritual stock. I come from parents and grandparents and great-grandparents who understood what it meant to look beyond the present moment and understand that God is true to God's word. And God does not fail us, even though we may have to make our way through some valleys. We don't do it alone. So understand that we have a sense of joy, we have a sense of trust that is beyond the immediacy of the circumstance. And coupled with that joy is a sense of hope and potential. The Bible tells us it has not yet appeared to us what we shall be. So we continue to allow ourselves to grow and become empowered in what it is that God imprints upon our hearts and our spirits. And then finally, when Jesus says, "Let these children come to me," don't hold them back, because heaven looks like this. He wants you to remember that heaven looks like this because children are full of joy and hope. Heaven looks like this because children are full of life and exuberance. Heaven looks like this because children are in the process of being nurtured. And in the same way that children are going through all of those things, so should we. But I think the final point that is so powerful and so meaningful is that we know that we have to abide with children. We cannot abandon them. We have to make sure that our presence is a constant for them. And that's what Jesus' promise is here. Let the children come to me. Don't hinder them. For heaven looks like this. Let them be in my presence, because I won't leave or forsake them. And in the same way that Jesus affords that promise to those children on that day, he reminds us that he doesn't give up on us. In our frailty, being a work in progress, in our missteps, in our mistakes, in the same way that we show graciousness to the children around us, thanks be to God that he shows graciousness to us. So my word for you this morning is a simple one. Love like Jesus has taught us to love. Welcome and beckon and nurture each other as Jesus models it for us as he talks to us about these little children. And remember that in the same way that we've not been abandoned or cast to the side, we're called to do the very same for those around us. I want to end with a story that talks about what it means to abide in the midst of challenge. It's a story by Elizabeth Ballard that I first heard shared by Marion Wright Edelman of the Children's Defense Fund. It's about one school teacher named Gene Thompson and one boy named Teddy Stollard. On the first day of school, Gene Thompson told her students, "Boys and girls, I love you all the same." But we know that teachers sometimes tell little white lies. Little Teddy Stollard was a boy Gene Thompson did not like. He slouched in his chair and he didn't pay attention. He was often unkempt and he was a thoroughly unattractive boy and she didn't like him. But teachers have records, and Gene Thompson had Teddy's records. In the first grade, they said, "Teddy's a good boy, shows promise in his work and attitude, but has a poor home situation." Second grade records. "Teddy's a good boy. He does what he's told, but he's too serious. His mother is terminally ill." Third grade. "Teddy is falling behind in his work and needs help. His mother died this year. His father shows no interest." Fourth grade. "Teddy is in deep waters. He's totally withdrawn." Christmas came, and the boys and girls all brought the teacher a present. And they were all nicely wrapped, and they put them on Gene Thompson's desk, all except Teddy's, whose was wrapped in brown paper and held together with Scotch tape. And on his present, he scribbled in crayon, "For Ms. Thompson, from Teddy." She tore open the brown paper bag and found a rhinestone bracelet with most of the stones missing, and also a mostly empty bottle of perfume. When the other boys and girls began to giggle, she had enough sense to put some of the perfume on her wrist and put the bracelet on and hold up her wrist to the children and say, "Doesn't it smell lovely? Isn't the bracelet pretty?" And taking their cue from the teacher, the children all agreed. At the end of the day, when all the children had left, Teddy lingered and came over to Gene Thompson and said, "Miss Thompson, all day long, you smell just like my mother." And her bracelet, that's her bracelet, and it looks so nice on you too. I'm really glad you liked my presents. And when he left, Gene Thompson got on her knees and buried her head in the chair and begged God to forgive her. The next day when the children came, she was a different teacher. She was a teacher with a heart, and she cared for all the children, but especially those that needed help, and especially Teddy. She tutored him and put herself out for him, and by the end of the year, he had caught up with a lot of the kids and was even ahead of some. Several years later, Jean Thompson got this note. Dear Miss Thompson, I'm graduating from high school and wanted you to be the first to know. Love, Teddy. 4 years later, she got another note. Dear Miss Thompson, I wanted you to know the university was not easy, but I've liked it. Love, Teddy. And several years later, there was still another note saying, Dear Miss Thompson, as of today, I am Theodore J. Stollard, M.D. How about that? Wanted you to be the first to know. I'm going to be married in July, and I wanted you to come and sit where my mother would have sat because you're the only family I have. Dad died last year. And she went, and she sat where his mother would have sat because she deserved to be there. She'd become a decent and loving human being. Children, in all their joy and beauty, children, in all their frailty and vulnerability, and children who, just like all of us, deserve love and protection and nurture. They look just like heaven. Amen.